I was hoping that there might be a REST API included in ICRIS so that we could transfer data and attachments programmatically. Is that the case, or is that something that could possibly be included?
Well, I am probably the least technologically savvy person in our office, and I have no idea what a REST API is. So I'm going to kick that question to Shannon and see if maybe she can give an answer to that.
Hi, Marie. This is Shannon, and I am the data manager here at the SHPO. And we did not actually include that in this iteration of our ICRIS development. It is something that we were interested in doing, but will likely be something in a later version.
Okay, thank you.
Can Marie or Shannon, can you just briefly explain what that is for me and anyone else who might not understand?
It would be a live connection to our data through their GIS.
I see. Thank you.
Marie, just a follow up, we will allow exporting of GIS data, so you could do a comparison that way, and also exporting tabular data.
Oh, okay. Our web application is well, it's a web application and a field client. It's how we collect our site data. So we have a web application that is our database, and right now we use that to export to ASI and IHSI databases to submit to you. But all of our site data, all of our resource data, and our project management takes place in this web application we've developed in-house. And the field client is something that's held locally on our tablets. And so we download and upload between that to collect digital data in the field. And so our hope is that we could submit our resource data, from our database, obviously with any tweaks for fields or anything that reflect changes beyond the current ASI, IHSI format, whatever they may be, so that we could just connect our web application to yours and submit, complete whatever fields need to be submitted, submit any attachments that way.
Okay, I think that would be something that we would have to talk to our developers about and would not likely be in this iteration. We are going to have a Survey 123 application for collecting data in the field. So there may be a way to connect to that. But when we get to that part of our development, maybe we can have a further conversation.
That would be great. Thank you.
And we have had a couple conversations with a couple different federal agencies that have their own database that they're required to use as well. And we've discussed with them the possibility of having the developers develop some kind of translation module so that you all can use your own database to collect data and then upload that into ICRIS. Those would be elements that likely the agencies would need to fund, not something that the State Historical Society would fund. But if that was something you wanted to fund, we would certainly be willing to work with our developers to, work that process out for you.
Okay, thank you. That helps.
Jeremiah Pink.
Yeah, so I'm Jeremiah Pink. I'm also at the Cultural Resources Management Office at INL. And so I think that Marie and I both missed the invite to the session on ICRIS last week. And I set up our GIS database that we use in the field and for managing our geospatial data here in-house. And I'm wondering if Marie and I'd have the ability to sort of set up a kind of a side session with Shannon and your developers to talk through some of the technical details of these things.
Yes, certainly at some point, we'd be happy to do that, and that'll be contingent upon availability of both Shannon and our developers. We're careening forward at this point, and it's a very busy time for all of us and them. But yeah, of course, we're happy to talk to anybody directly about the system and how it will work and what it's intended to do. If you did miss the session last week, that is posted, excuse me, a recording of that meeting can be found on our website. So if you go to the State Historical Society website and the SHPO web page, on the right-hand side, you'll see a new tab for ICRIS. And if you click on that, you'll find the YouTube video of that session that you can listen to if you like. And we'll post all future information sessions up there as well. So that is available for folks at this time to look at.
That sounds good. Yeah, I think that we're looking for some basic information so that we can just kind of know what changes you anticipate making, so that we can begin making the steps we need to make on our end to work toward that transition.
Sure. I guess I would suggest you start with that video, see if some of your questions are answered there, and then we can go from there. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
Okay.
I posted a link to the video in the chat.
Thank you, Shannon. Cami Sayer.
Good morning. Yeah, I thought I'd just follow up on that GIS question because I was at the listening session last week. And what you did let us all know is that you're going to be going to the use of just polygons only in your GIS. And I was just thinking that it would be helpful maybe for you to expand on that a little bit with regard to how you're going to be treating the linear features, which is kind of a, as I understand it from that last week, is going to be different. We're going to have a separate form for that. And I would assume that's going to be polygons as well. But, kind of in the same vein as the last question, we keep a lot of point data in the agency. And so we're thinking about how we might have to, change our way of doing business to accommodate the new database. So if you could just expand on what you're thinking with isolates and linear features and GIS, that'd be helpful. Thanks.
Sure. Shannon, I'm going to punt that one over to you. We were just talking about this morning. I think we have an answer for you on that. Shannon, if you could answer that.
Yeah, sure. We are doing polygon data for archaeological sites and built environment resources. We are doing a line feature for linear resources. Just made more sense with being able to easily edit the route of a linear feature, just in case it's mapped incorrectly or there's a new route that's going to be added to it. So linear resources will be lines. Sorry, was there a question?
That wasn't from me.
Okay.
I think that was just background noise.
So we are working on the isolate piece. We have not developed that part yet. Our initial thinking is making that purely a GIS layer and not have any associated external like tabular data. Like currently we have the isolate site form. We were thinking about just doing it in GIS and then having any of the detail about that isolate held in the survey report.
And that would be point data and not polygon data.
Yes, that's correct.
But we know that isolates have been, one of those nagging questions for everybody. And, we're certainly eager to hear your thoughts on how those might be approached, if you have any suggestions or ideas.
Well, this is Cami, and that actually sounds like a good idea. Um, I I like the idea of kind of dialing down the form side of isolates and capturing them in GIS, I think is something that most people are doing when they're identifying them in their reports. As you know, at least I know that that's how a number of forests are working it. So I'd love to hear what other people think on the call, but that sounds good to me. And interesting though, I guess I just will weigh in. It will take some workflow adjustments probably on a number of forest parts to maybe, match up their data with what you're going forward with. For instance, I know on the salmon chalice, they moved from line data to polygon data to kind of reduce the number of different types of feature types they were managing. But again, as we go forward, I think that, some of these things could be adjusted pretty easily by buffering things and moving it either direction. So I appreciate your answer. Thanks.
Does anyone else have any comments or thoughts about that approach to isolates?
This is Jeremiah Spink again. I certainly wouldn't mind, reducing the workload for documenting isolates. I'm wondering if there's going to be sort of a statewide definition of an isolated find, or if you're going to continue to rely on agencies to develop their own definitions.
At this point, we were planning, I think, to continue to rely on agencies to define an isolate themselves. We have a working definition that we typically work with, and I would have one of the archaeologists expand on that, as I'm not an archaeologist. Moving forward after, once we get ICRIS up and running and, things working, I think we'd like to eventually implement agency meetings, regular agency meetings, whether those be quarterly or biannually, and where there would be opportunity to have these kinds of conversations and maybe come to agreement. Unfortunately, Idaho doesn't have a professional archaeology association anymore, where in the past those kinds of questions would be addressed and maybe some kind of consensus agreement come to. So possibly in some kind of agency meetings, we could address those kinds of issues and try to come to consensus. So we're all using the same model, as it were. I don't know if Lindsay or Shannon, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I can step in. This is Lindsay. And I think, we've gone back and forth, and like Tricia said, internally we sort of have a definition we work with for isolates, but just because, each of our agencies is so different, and each of you manage different resources and, from on high in DC have different definitions. As a state, we've really tried to avoid, trying to force things into a really narrow definition. So for the time being, we're gonna stay with the very loose, please define an isolate, and we'll tell you if we strongly disagree with your definition approach. I know it's not always the best and not always the easiest when coming from other states that do have strict definitions, but that's just sort of the decision we made for now.
So in the absence of a form with that had our definition of an isolated find, we would just be expected to have that information in the report.
Yes. In the section where you would discuss the isolates, you'd be expected to have your definition in there, and then, Shannon can speak more eloquently to, the tabular format that the the information should be in. But yes, that'd be where your definition would be.
And you know, as you know, a lot of the work that we do at INL doesn't, because we have a programmatic agreement, doesn't rise to the level of requiring a standalone report. We would just be providing sort of those definitions and perhaps our annual report.
Yes,
Yeah.
a lot of our, oh, sorry, go for it, Trisha.
No, go ahead. No, that's just fine. Go ahead,
Oh,
Lindsay.
I was just going to say that a lot of, once we do this big switch over, a lot of our annual reports and our PAs will be meeting with you guys and discussing more exactly how we'll want to change that to accommodate for ICRIS. But yes, that's our thought right now would be that information will be collected annually, biannually, however you're typically reporting.
That sounds good.
Okay, I'm not seeing any hands, so I'm gonna throw out, a question for you. So we're changing some of our terminology in this process. I mentioned in the session we did last week, the informational session, that, for instance, we rather than calling them site forms, we've had to switch over to calling them resource records, and this is because the system itself can't differentiate between a site as a type of property and a site form. It just got a little too confusing. So there are areas where we're changing our terminology. Another area where we've changed terminology is that rather than using prehistoric, we'll be using the term pre-colonial. And we know that the term Paleo-Indian has some baggage. And, I guess we look to you as professionals in the field to kind of query, what alternative terminology could we use rather than Paleo-Indian to identify or describe that temporal phase. We're eager to hear your thoughts on that. Nobody, nobody. How do you feel about the term Paleo-archaic? Nikki. Oh, Nikki was there and gone. I don't know if you had a question, Nikki.
Well, no, I was just thinking about it, and I have not seen it referred to as anything differently in the academic literature. So I'm not sure that, I personally,
Can't hear
I
Nikki.
wouldn't feel. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's better. Thank you, Nikki.
I moved my microphone out of the way. But I was going to say, I haven't seen it referred to anything else in the academic literature. And I personally would be hesitant to create a new term for that period without consideration from both the academic field, but also from our tribal partners, because, it directly reflects on their history.
Yes, and we have certainly, and we have some tribal partners on the call, so hopefully we'll hear from them on this. Marissa, you got your hand up next.
Yeah, we typically use the time period. So we use terminal or late Pleistocene, early Holocene, and middle and late Holocene for how we describe those periods. And then I did have a question on the term pre-colonial versus pre-contact. What was were other people suggesting pre-colonial and some pre-contact, and how did it land there? I guess the discussion on that.
I'm actually trying to remember.
Yeah, I can give some
Yeah, go ahead,
background on
Lindsay.
that one. That term came out of the Park Service, out of a lot of their work on the new traditional cultural places bulletin. And it also came out of a few different, what's the word? White papers published by like the Society for Black Archaeologists, and there are two others that are escaping me at the moment, but I can send them around that were discussing about decolonizing our terminology, and that in a strange way using the term colonial would help to sort of remove the connotations that of like first contact, and that contact somehow changed, because I mean, we all know that at the point that white settlers arrived in Idaho, they had already been influencing the area through various means for a while, and just influencing the continent in general. So that's where a lot of it came from. It came from some of the more academic discourse on archaeological terms.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Jeremiah's?
I tend to use the word paleoarchaic. I was just going to mention that it is a term that's out there in the academic literature. It tends to be used more commonly in the Great Basin area, whereas Paleo-Indian tends to be more common to the east of us on the plains. And so I think that there's tool traditions that we have, showing up in archaeological assemblages in Idaho that could be classified under the traditions of both chronologies. But I would, I think, defer to what the tribal groups of Idaho preferred in terms of the names for the various phases and periods in Idaho's chronologies.
Thank you, Jeremiah. Taylor?
Yeah, so the term Paleo-Indian, I just think that you really need to be talking to the tribal people, the tribes in Idaho, because I think the viewpoint is that they were never really paleo. When we think back in time, we think like we're all the same people and those are just our ancestors. And so that's just something like I would recommend is like a separate meeting with the tribes. But the term pre-colonial, like when you say that, I'm thinking of like the East Coast. So I'm thinking like colonial times, because that's like that's a time period. And like, and when you're thinking of that certain time period, when you get to Idaho, it's not until the fur trappers that come in Idaho, and that's not really the same time period. And so that's why I kind of referred to pre-contact, because it was before contact of Europeans.
Okay, thank you, Taylor. And we are in the process of scheduling a meeting with the tribes to talk about a variety of issues, and this will absolutely be part of the conversation. Thank you. Okay, well, if no one else has any of your own thoughts and comments you want to share at the moment, I'll throw out another question out there. We're building, as we build this application and our GIS, we're going to include multiple layers in the application, in the GIS. We have, brainstormed a number of layers that we feel will be helpful to you all as you navigate through our GIS. And Shannon can tell you the ones that we've identified in that regard. But I guess we'd like to hear from you if there are layers that we haven't thought of that you think would be useful for us to include in our GIS of ICRIS. So Shannon, can you share that?
I am looking for my list right now. Give me just a moment.
Sorry. We did discuss this earlier, but I didn't discuss what order I'd be throwing these questions at her. So we'll get that up in a minute. Okay, in the meantime, I'll take a question from Kelly. Kelly, you're on mute.
Sorry, it's Kelly Barnes with Fish and Wildlife Service. I was just wondering if at some point you guys could pop up like a draft working data dictionary that we could kind of work off of, play with, see if it's working for us. You know, not obviously anything final, but I'm happy to use whatever system you guys are using as far as making things fit with the ICRIS system. Thanks.
Again, me, not very technologically savvy. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by data dictionary, but hopefully maybe Shannon is, or you can elaborate on what specifically you're asking for.
So just sort of the schema that would basically be the categories in the GIS that you're looking for, like the specific, like in the data table, what fields you'd be using, and if there are drop downs, what specific items would be in that drop down field.
Oh, sure.
And then, you know, how many numbers, if it's a number field, you know, that kind of information. And yeah, Shannon can help out with that too, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, we have some mock-up, not a finalized by any means, of our archaeological site form that we're going to share with you in a little bit. And that will have some drop down. It'll kind of give you an idea of the drop down fields. But yes, absolutely, we can do that. And go ahead, Shannon, you can answer.
Okay, so Kelly, as far as the GIS, we're only going to be storing a few fields in the GIS, and all the remaining data will be stored in the SQL tabular data. So as far as the GIS is concerned, the resources will have the Smithsonian number, and it will have how that shape was derived. So whether or not it was derived from GPS in the field, or if it was traced from a map, an old map, if it was just a general circle because I don't know where it is, that kind of thing. So that's basically all that we're going to have in the GIS itself.
But we can, you know, absolutely share those tabular data drop-down fields, you know, as those get developed and we're moving forward. You know, yeah. Shannon, are you ready to share that that information, the GIS layers, or should we answer another question?
I am having trouble finding it. I apologize.
Okay, that's fine. All right, we'll move on to Daryl Ferguson's question. Daryl?
Hi, Tricia. Can you expand a little on the auto generation of trinomials and how that's going to work? And specifically, will we be able to submit the site forms to get the trinomials before we submit the final reports?
Yes, I can, in my clumsy non-technology way, explain that. Yes, as you create a resource record, you can save that record and you can mark it as complete. So once you have the resource record finished, you've input all the data, you've uploaded the images that are associated with it, you will hit a complete button, and that'll just tell you on your end of things as an external user, okay, this one is done. as soon as you hit complete, a trinomial, a Smithsonian trinomial will be auto-generated to that form. So you will have that as soon as you hit that complete button. That complete is not the same as submit. You know, you will submit the whole project and the site forms when the whole project and all the site forms are completed. So you will have that trinomial generated and auto-populated into the form before you submit it to our office as soon as you hit the complete button.
Great, thank you.
Cami?
Yeah, that brought up another question. So once you hit the complete button, would you have the opportunity to go back and edit that form further? I'm just thinking about how often writing a report is a little bit like making sausage, and sometimes you would still need to make tweaks.
Yes, until you submit the resource record and report to our office, everything will be editable.
Great, thanks. I guess I don't have to put my hand up. I still have my mic open. I could ask another question.
Sure.
While we're waiting. Could you expand just a little bit further on what our options will be for updating site forms? I know we touched on this in the ICRIS meeting last week, but could you tell me the venues, I guess, that we would be available for us to just do minor edits to site forms that aren't necessarily strictly determination of eligibility changes, which I know is one option. So
I'm gonna kick that over to either Ashley or Shannon. Ashley, do you think you can pick that one up while Shannon works on finding the document to share?
Yeah, so if you're like talking about like minor tweaks, I don't think we have a way to do that versus a full update to the site form. So I know there's a capability for our office to do minor tweaks to site form, so it might be contacting our office to fix a site form, something like that. Otherwise, you could update it via your annual report or a DOE or within a project.
I guess that's what I would like a little expanding on. The annual report you referenced last week. Could you explain what that is?
Well, if you have a PA with us and you have reporting within that PA, you want to update something during that process, you could update a site during that process or resource record during the process.
Okay, that might be something I'd like to talk to you guys about in the future, because in many instances where we might be wanting to do a minor update to a site form might not be a project that would be included in the PA. It might be a larger landscape scale project or something. So.
Yeah, we can discuss that.
Great, thanks.
We've talked a little bit internally about approaches to things like that. And Ashley, you're going to be able to address this better than I am, or Shannon, about, you know, the possibility that our office, if we want to, or an agency could create a project that's not like a real project, but it would just be kind of very specifically intended for more or less exactly what you're saying. Like, you know, we could create an annual project. It would just be, you know, 2024 annual SHPO project. And through it, we could generate new site forms if we're out in the field and we want to record a property, or we want to edit a property, you know, we can do that, and then just sort of submit the whole thing at the end of the year as sort of like, okay, here's a bunch of data to add to our system. And I think we were thinking the agencies could do something similar if they wanted. And now is where I'm gonna kick it back to Ashley to make sure I said that correctly.
Yeah, so in this case, I forgot the other way you could do it is a section 110 report, but we had that discussion of creating a that like a project within ICRIS, leaving it open for the full, fiscal year, and then submitting it at the end of the year, and that would have site updates or newly reported sites and things like that. So that might be another option, Cami, for just creating like a dummy section 110 report, but you could count it probably a section 110 if you're doing, work to update these sites. So
yeah, I like those ideas. I mean, I think there's probably a few ways to tackle this, but it would be nice to have an avenue to not have to do additional work that really wouldn't be necessary. I think we've all kind of know that there's sometimes just a slight adjustment in the location or something like that. So I like that we're talking about it. I'd love to explore some sort of way to do it. And I think that 110 option or an annual report sounds like a good way to do it, because I think for agencies in any way, we're tracking that same sort of information because we're maintaining separate GIS databases as well. So thanks.
Yeah, I think the 110 option will be probably the best avenue.
Okay, I finally located it. I apologize. Our contractor has hired someone new to help organize things, and I went on vacation. So I wasn't able to find where he had reorganized it to. Anyway, let me share my screen. So this is kind of just a matrix of who sees what and that kind of thing. But basically the basic layers that will be available for anyone viewing ICRIS will be the state outline counties, the incorporated city boundaries, PLSS, and that's basically the general. And then we have the added value layers. And so we have things like the mining layer from the Idaho Department of Geology. We have ITD districts layer, land management layer, which would show who is managing that particular federal land. U.S. Forest Service boundaries, quad maps, that kind of thing. So this is just our working list of potential added value layers. But we were curious to see if anyone had any additional layers that they'd like to add in.
We were also going to include that I don't see on this list, the certified local government boundaries, so that project.
Sorry, that.
Yeah, project proponents. Yeah. So that is up there. Okay.
Yes, the multiple property documentation boundaries, the certified local governments, and then the actual national registered districts.
And our hope, our intent is that with the certified local governments and the tribal layers in particular, that, if a project is created that intersects with one of those boundaries, that the system will prompt the user to make sure they recognize that their project intersects with one of these jurisdictions and provide contact information for consulting with those entities. But if there are other just general layers or very specific layers that you think would be useful to have in the ICRIS, we'd love to hear it. Jeremiah.
So you're just looking for input on base layers?
Yeah.
So a few suggestions right off the bat. I'm not seeing land status on the list unless I'm missing it.
Land status meaning
owner, ownership. So which agency the land is currently managed by?
So we have land management.
Land management.
Oops.
Okay.
And I clicked on the link and inadvertently.
Oops. Okay. And do you have like roads are typically helpful for reference?
Like the Tiger roads?
Um,
Or
yeah,
just
that may
all
be
roads?
yeah, highways, larger roads, and then of course the two tracks and whatnot that most of us use to access sites. I'm not sure which data source would be the most appropriate, but some kind of roads based layer would be helpful in a base map.
Okay, I will look into that. I've been trying to find the most authoritative data, which is why some of these don't have hyperlinks, because I haven't been able to find which data repository has the authoritative data on that. So I will add that to my list. And actually, if any of you know of the authoritative data for like ecosystems or watershed, it would be greatly appreciated.
Any other GIS layers that anyone can think of would be useful or desirable to have in the system?
Well, cities and towns was my other suggestion.
So I have incorporated cities.
Okay, yeah.
So it won't include unincorporated cities, but it will have the actual boundary of the city boundary. Kenny?
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know, I could look into trying to acquire that watershed boundary information that you're looking for.
That would be fantastic. I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Cami. Nikki?
I just dropped the water authority data set in the chat.
Oh, thank you.
So, yep.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, not seeing any more questions or comments right this minute. So Shannon, do you want to share the sort of mock-up of the archaeological site form and the, sort of the comparison from the previous site form?
Sure. Okay, so this is a working version, so keep that in mind. When you go to create a resource, the first thing that will pop up will be a drop down of what is the property type? Is it an archaeological site, a building, a structure, an object, a historic site, a district, or linear? So those are the options that will pop up, and based on what you answer, it will drive the additional data points that we need. So this first resource general tab just has the general information that's collected on all resources regardless of the type. And so we've got resource name, we have ownership, which is very generalized now. Just public, state, local, private, or multiple owners. Temporal designation, this would be only applicable for archaeology resources. And then we have some agency and field ID fields, whether or not the resource is restricted, which this is whether or not the resource can be viewed by general public users. A brief description of the resource and history, eligibility, all that's pretty straightforward. And the one that has mostly changed, not mostly, has somewhat changed, sorry, is the archaeology And so this is, we have some general information like property type. Oh, sorry, we already did that. So archaeology, property type. Then we have the primary site type. This dropdown is not accurate. We have a different list going in there. Phase, this is basically all the same categories that are on the current ASI form. A brief resource description. This field would be what is displayed in the GIS when you click on the resource to get information about it. Instead of having the tables where you have, you know, one scraper and a brief description, and then one metate or what, you know, whatever it is, we did away with that table. And so now it would just be, which this drop down is not working, but you would be selecting the artifact type so that you could say presence or absence of. And same thing with features. It would be something like this. And then a combined artifact and feature description. All of these fields are the same. But that is the extent of the site form. Now, I did do kind of a basic from what the site form looks like currently and what fields are going away and which fields are going to be captured by the system. So the green highlighted fields are all things that are going to be captured by the system automatically. So there's no need for you to do that data entry. The fields in red are ones that we have done away with because they're obsolete. So I'm not sure if you all can read all of this. So let me just zoom in a little bit here. And a lot of this came from the survey that we sent out. And so that's where decisions were made based on that. So federal administrative unit would be going away. Site dimensions will go away, but area will still be there and it's calculated based on the GIS shape. UTM would go away and access. The site type, this section is now just a drop down where you would have picking the actual site type based on the National Register of Historic Places. The themes and periods would be now considered area of significance and phases. We now have just comments on significance, and instead of having this secondary, it's not eligible, explain why section. Condition has gone away. All of the things that are multiple checkboxes are now a drop down. All of this remain the same. Excavation volume has gone away. And most of the environment data, with the exception of a text field where you would describe the vegetation and the landform, and also the visible surface area. And with the prehistoric and historic sites, we've combined that to a list of artifacts and a list of features, and then a big description of those artifacts and features. So that is, I know that was kind of really fast. So I see, Gina, you have a question?
Yeah, so on the description boxes, is there a word limit on those?
It depends on which field. Some of the fields we have a 255 character limit. But like these fields here can be however long you need them to be. And there's also a spot for doing attachments. So if you wanted to actually list out all of the artifacts that were found in an Excel spreadsheet, you could just upload that spreadsheet as an attachment to the site form. If you had any copies of historical data, you could attach those, and then any photos. And obviously this logo is not a photo of the site. I was just playing around. And then your GIS area down here.
Okay,
And just,
so then, sorry.
oh, well, I was just gonna say that, you know, where there's a more severe limit, like the 255 characters, that's, you know, for something like the very brief description that will pop up with the GIS that, you know, we don't want to be a super long description, but then there are areas further down in the resource record that allow for and provide for, you know, virtually unlimited adding of text.
Okay.
Jeremiah?
Yeah, I was wondering if you go into a little bit more detail on the individual artifact and feature information that you're going to be looking for.
Yes, let me get back to that. So, oops, went too far. So this obviously is still under construction. But the thought process was that we would have just a general idea of the types of artifacts and features for like a summary. And that's where these drop downs would come into play. And then you would have a very detailed description of what those artifacts and features are. So this would be for being able to search our database for all middens, or, you know, being able to classify things quickly and pulling out those items. Let me see if I can get my list. Whoops. Sorry, just a minute. My list of artifacts that were our working copy. All right.
While she digs through that, I'll just mention, for those of you who weren't on the meeting last week, Shannon is spending close to 40 hours a week every week on this project for months, and will continue to do that until we go live later this year. So she is up to her eyeballs in this project.
And I also have like 30 spreadsheets all over the place. So the drop down for artifacts, we would have two, actually, I believe two separate ones. I can't remember. I still have vacation brain. I apologize. But we would have the material type and then the artifact category. And then here's just a general description of what we mean by that particular type of artifact category. And the same thing with features. You would have a list to choose from. And then I don't know if we've really fleshed this one out, the historic artifacts. We were thinking of maybe doing a category or theme type for the artifacts. I don't know if we've really fleshed that one out quite yet for the drop downs.
We went back and forth on how to do that quite a bit at INL also. I guess what I'm wondering is for individual artifacts, most of us in the field are using a GPS unit to record the location of individual artifacts. We're putting a lot of our descriptive information into there, and then we can, you know, we include the SHPO categories in the GPS units and in our in the CRMDB that Marie was discussing earlier, and so there's some differences among the archaeologists at INL and how we put that information into the current ASI database. So some people, if it put in biface and then they put in like the total number of bifaces, while others put in biface and then they put in the individual artifact number for each of the bifaces and have a more detailed description of the individual artifacts. And I'm wondering what you kind of have in mind for this database. Is this going to be a summary table, or will we be able to enter information for individual like artifact numbers that we record within sites?
So we are not going to have a place for individual artifact information unless you want to put it into the text box. But I think that that's a really good example of where having taken that information from your GIS and put it into a spreadsheet and then attach it to the resource form here. Here we would just have that, like you said, that if there's a biface, so you would choose one of these options like stone tool, and that's the general, that there were stone tools present, and then any further description that you want to add would be a supplement added to the site form. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. We'll have to think about, Maria and I will have to discuss the easiest way to translate our data to that format.
Well, I do have how we're translating it currently. Sorry, I lost my mouse. How we're translating what is currently in the database and like the crosswalk from what is current to what the new data will be. So when we get that all flushed out, I would be glad to share that with you.
Thank you. Sounds good.
Katie?
Hi, good morning. So my question was more, for parts of these site records, such as like the primary site type and other values, is there going to be clear guidance given to us, like how those values are defined? I know when we rolled out the BLM state database and the fixed domain values associated with that, is that those domain values were defined. So like a lithic scatter was this value in the domain, but that guidance didn't necessarily trickle down to us using the database. So there was a lot of inconsistencies, and like things that were a residential site type were put in as settlement and vice versa, little nuances like that. But it's important because, we want to be consistent so the data is more usable. So I was just curious if there was going to be like clear guidance of the values in the record and what they match to.
Yes, and
Okay.
I can share, we're essentially using that same data dictionary that you're referring to for those types. So let me, so you're talking about the temporary camp versus settlement?
Yeah, there was like residential versus settlement. I know there was some nuances there, like one's prehistoric, one's meant for historic site types. And like my brain just mixed up the two. So I was using those inconsistently until I actually looked at the guidance. But I'm very happy to hear that the primary site types are following this schema, because that'll make it easier for us to crosswalk on the BLM side for sure.
Yeah, and we are interested to hear if anyone has any suggestions for adding to this list. It seems fairly comprehensive, but and I would be glad to send this out. Actually, I can just drop it in the chat. And yes, there will be that definition will be available right when you're selecting it.
Perfect.
Yeah, they'll have the little info bubbles essentially that you can click on to get that further definition. Jessica.
Hi. Sorry if I misunderstood, but could you just clarify something? So let's say we're submitting an Excel spreadsheet attachment like the one you were showing earlier. That's basically an artifact assemblage. Is that format you were showing going to be something set, or do we have the freedom to, kind of create custom tables based on our own recording styles?
That would be something that would be a free for all. Whatever
Okay.
data you would like to put in. And the reason that we wanted to leave it open that way is because people want to collect different data and have data collected already in a particular format. And since it's just going to be an attachment for information purposes and not for actually ingesting into our tabular data, that there was really no reason for us to have a set format.
Okay, perfect. That's what I was hoping for.
Jenny.
Good morning. I have kind of a basic question, and I apologize if this is written down somewhere that I should have already seen it and I didn't. But how will people qualify to be sorry, vacation brain, Shannon, I hurt with you. Okay, so how will people qualify to be able to use ICRIS from this point forward? Is there any kind of criteria that will be laid out, or is it just anybody who already consults with the SHPO will automatically be allowed into this system? Just curious.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. There will be various levels of access to different information in the ICRIS. So there will be a guest access that anyone from the general public can use, and they will have access to limited information, primarily just built environment information that isn't location restricted or information restricted. There are a handful of those properties, that built environment properties, that are restricted, but for the most part, the built environment layer is not restricted. So they can, noodle around the map and look at properties and, look for their own property, that kind of thing. But then, much like now with access to our data, if you want access to our data, you have to submit to our office your professional qualifications, and at that point we give you access, and it'll be the same way. You'll need to register as an ICRIS user, and then yeah, Shannon's kind of pulling up a page right now, and you'll have to upload your credentials into the system, and then we will give you access on the back end of things. So there, there will be, restrictions to who can view certain information the same way we do it now. It'll just all be done electronically. Does that answer your question, or do you have any follow-up?
Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Sure. Joshua?
Yes, hello. I got a couple questions related to the archaeology section of the site form updates. So no debitage counts, is that correct? Or what's the plan with debitage?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Could you pull up the example that site form from like the ASI example one? I think like the debitage different types and then the material types were highlighted in red. So I'm wondering if those are still included in this site form or not. Well, resource record, sorry.
It's okay. We know what you're talking about. The system just doesn't know what you're talking about.
So not as like an artifact category.
I think what Josh is referring to is the portion of the current ASI form that asks you to estimate the relative debitage quantity and then describe the material types that are present. Are there going to be fields akin to that in the present system, or is that being dropped in favor of just sort of the expectation that we would add that to perhaps an attached Excel spreadsheet?
Thanks, Jeremiah.
Shannon, you're on mute if you're talking.
Thank you. I was. Yeah, we've removed this section because it didn't seem to be very helpful, at least from my data collection perspective. But if you have that information and you'd like to provide it in the text box, you can, or as an attachment. Either way, we will take that and put it into the system. Yes.
But if I don't count debitage, that's not bad.
It's not bad, no.
Okay. All right. And I got another question too. How would I access forms in the ICRIS system? Like, how do I take them offline? Am I able to take them like offline, like download them? Am I able to print them? Like how would I take something out in the field with me if I wanted to like look at a form?
You mean like a blank form or an existing legacy form?
Like say an existing legacy form, or say, 2 years from now I fill out a form and then 4 years I go back and I want to take that form with me out in the field. How would I do that?
So you'll be able to, subscription users will be able to print off the forms and download and print off the forms and take them into the field. Either, existing legacy forms, or if you're someone who likes to work with paper and in the field to fill in your field form or site information, rather than doing that electronically, you can print off what'll essentially be a blank form. And I guess correct me if I'm wrong on any of that, Shannon.
No, we will provide a blank form that you can download or print off the current data that's in the database.
Okay, perfect. That answers that question. And then last question, I know you've mentioned photos a couple times. I'm wondering, are there any expectations with photos, or like what's the process to upload photos? Is there metadata associated with them? Just a little bit more info on the photos would be really nice.
We always have expectations associated with photos, hoping that they'll be useful for us to understand a site. Shannon, maybe you can answer the process question better.
Sure. So there will be JPEG format. You can upload however many photos you need. Ashley, could you speak to the actual requirements?
Yeah, so once you upload your photo, there's a minimum of 2 photos for each resource. And then the expectation is that if it's a complex site or a complex building or buildings, that there's additional photos. But once you upload each photo, there'll be a prompt for you to enter the description of that photo.
Okay, perfect. Answers all my questions. Thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you. Kelly?
Okay, so I have a couple questions too. So the first one is, would the database as a whole or specific text boxes be searchable? For example, like artifact type, would we be able to search those things, or is there something we could do, like use semicolons between our artifact types to make it more searchable, or is that something we can't do at this point?
We are in the midst of developing the search functionality. There will be tabular search capabilities.
Right.
And we are deciding which fields are appropriate to have search capabilities, and which ones would be most applicable to our external users. Of course, I can search any of the fields on the back end. If there was something that was specific that you weren't having the functionality to do that, but we're working through that right now.
Okay, great.
But
And then
certainly, if you have, if any of you have thoughts about specific fields that you would like to be searchable, please let us know either right now, or if you want to spend a little time thinking about it, you can email that to us, you know, later. But yeah, if you have specific thoughts, Kelly, right now that you want to let us know, please do.
thanks. Okay. And my other question is, so with me being with Fish and Wildlife, obviously I work a lot off refuges too, like on partners projects and things. Obviously, Carla the same. So would we have access to all of the resources, or would we by default be restricted to certain resources based on where we work? Or is the database going to be open pretty much to professionals?
Yes, that latter.
Great.
If
Okay.
you are a professionally qualified professional, or a Secretary of Interior's standards qualified professional, you will have access to all of the data and all the site records and reports via the GIS in our system.
Great. I just want to say, like, it's really obvious that a lot of thought has gone into this, so I really appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for that. We have really put in a lot of thought into this and trying to make it the most functional system as possible. So I appreciate that.
Thanks.
Gina?
Oh, Trisha, can I chime in?
Oh, yeah, go.
Yeah. I did want to specify that the only things that professionals may have restricted are resource records and information on reservations, or things that tribes request us to further restrict the information on. So we're still working out exactly what those resources would be, but those would be the few exceptions to that rule.
Absolutely, and thank you, Lindsay, for clarifying that.
So would we know that there was something there, just so we would know to ask if we need to do an avoidance in that case?
We are working on scheduling a meeting with the tribes to really talk through all of that with them, and so we don't have a specific answer for you on that right now. But as we have those meetings and develop the system to address that, we will let you know at future informational sessions and training sessions as well as we get closer to go live. Gina, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, so that kind of mock-up form that you had of what our ASI site form is now and what's being removed and what's going to be there. So I'm worried for distance to permanent water. I know that's a huge thing, especially I think we're playing for understanding sites and kind of that kind of stuff, especially when it comes to pre-contact sites. And so I was just kind of wondering, even if we didn't include the water source, but the distance to permanent water, how that was shifted into be removed. And then I also understand that we can include some of this information in the text box, but part of the beauty of having these site forms with these numbers is that they're easily locatable information. And so everybody's going to want to throw the information in those, either not include certain things like what kind of plants and that kind of stuff are out there. So I'm just kind of wondering why those have been removed. I understand technically percentage and that kind of stuff is a little confusing for vegetation, but water and just understanding the vegetation itself, because that's also helpful for relocating why those don't have a specific spot other than just the description, because once they get put in there, it's harder to locate that information.
Shannon, are you going to answer?
Yeah, I was going to say the main reason that we got rid of that was because that is something that you can query in GIS to figure out its distance to water. So yes, that was the reason for that.
And
Okay.
the on-site vegetation, I'm trying to remember the conversation, and archaeologists, filled us in for me, but was this one of the sort of topics that we weren't really often getting these filled in?
Yeah, there a lot of these ones, like Shannon said, they're like, this is a permanent water, you can query that in GIS, and actually probably a lot more accurately than we had written on most of our forms. A lot of these are sections that we noticed people, if you did a big landscape survey that's just gigantic, they would be identical on every single one, which we all know that at each site, vegetation will vary a little bit, even if you're in the same general region. So we just found that these weren't particularly useful, and that we felt like, these and a lot of the other sections that were removed, we just weren't getting any data that we could actually query and would be used by anyone. So, we think it's really important to understand, obviously, the vegetation there, but we just weren't getting anything useful from the forms. And rather than, starting to try to police this more strictly, I think we figured that you can, as Sharon said, you can get a lot of it in GIS, and that would be a more useful route to go.
I'm looking at the chat, and there have been a couple of questions about sharing information, the crosswalk information, and also would it be possible to share the ASI to ICRIS PDF file? I think we could probably put that up on the website where we have the recording of the previous information session. We could probably put those documents up there. So why don't we look for that in, within a day or two. We should probably be able to put that up there by then. Carla?
Yeah, I guess I had a couple questions. My first one was about when you download the site form. I know that you said you were removing the UTMs because it was redundant, but when you download the site form, is that going to be auto-populated? I guess, because that's the information that I might need if I bring it out in the field, possibly. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
Yes, that does make sense. We haven't gotten to the part about printing off the site forms and how it will look and what information it will include. I anticipated that there would be a lot of data that would be pulled directly from the GIS. And so that is one that I will add to my list of like the centroid of the shape.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. And then my other question was, will you guys be charging like a flat fee per year for access to the site, or what are you guys thinking when you decided?
Yeah, so yes, the answer is yes, but it will depend on who the user is, what that fee is. It'll be an annual subscription price. And I will tell you that the federal agency's annual subscription will be considerably less than the private consultant subscription fees. And we sort of intend to do it by office or forest or district. So, the Boise National Forest will have a subscription, and all of the users on the forest will have access for the one subscription. Each individual will not need to subscribe separately. BLM districts will be treated the same way. Some of you are from smaller agencies, you only have the one office, and so it'll work like that. There will be a no fee option where you can access the system and upload projects, but it will not have many of these efficiencies built into it. So you know, you're essentially paying for value added to the system and not paying to consult with our office, because you can still consult with our office without the full-blown system. Does that answer your question? We have not determined what those levels will be yet. We still have to work with our fiscal officer to and our director and our board of trustees has to approve you know, our fee schedules. So we're working on figuring out what that will be. The major issue being that we need to replace the earned income that we have received over the years from record search fees that we've charged. That's critical to the operations of our office. So we're working that out, but the federal agencies will be treated differently than the commercial users.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Cami?
Hi, I just wanted to respond to your question about the tabular search capabilities and put in a request for agency project and site numbers.
Oh yeah, but I think we absolutely have planned on including those for sure.
Seemed like a good time. And also I appreciate the question about the UTM Centroid, because I think that would be very useful for us as well. We need it for fire and a number of other things to be quickly discoverable. Thanks.
Yep. Good to know. Thank you. Taylor.
So I just have a comment on just like tagging off of what Gina said about the taking away the plants and distance and water. I know like a lot of surveys have like a lot of the same, like large surveys have a lot of the same information, but for research purposes and for other researchers, I think that information is very important because the tribal people, plants was a big part of their lifestyle. And when you connect it with the artifacts and the type of artifacts that are being used, it really gives a complete picture of what's happening and how to understand these sites. And then another comment. Oh, so since you're taking that part away, are there going to be set guidelines of what needs to be in the description box? Like, so since you're taking that away, is that going to be like in the description, this needs to have this distance to water, this needs to have these type of plants and like percentages or anything of like that?
Yes, each of those fields will have an information bubble that you can click on that will tell you what is expected to be in that field, included in that text.
And you know, none of this is set in stone at this point. And you know, we've heard from a couple of your possible concerns about this. So maybe we'll revisit and query you all in a brief survey to sort of get a more holistic view of how these particular fields are viewed from your perspective and the necessity of them. You know, certainly if the great hue and cry is that they should continue to be included, we can revisit that. So you know, this is exactly the things we want to hear from you right now. So I appreciate that, and we'll make sure to follow up with that. Jeremiah's.
Yeah, I also had a comment about the vegetation fields. I guess in my experience, what I've seen is that various archaeologists have different levels of knowledge and competency as regards to recording vegetation, and so often identifying specific species is a little bit difficult. And I think that's probably why you're seeing a lot of sort of copy paste vegetation descriptions across big projects. You know, they're like, we're out here in the desert, it's all sagebrush and crested wheatgrass, and so we're just going to put that on all the site forms. And so I'm wondering, as an alternative to that, because most archaeologists aren't trained as botanists, and we are often not terribly good at it, if there'd be sort of a simpler solution where perhaps we'd be asked to identify the habitat of the site, so like sagebrush steppe versus forest, and then like subhabitats within that. So like forested slope versus non-forested slope. And then, I think that one of the most important things that comes out of our vegetation descriptions is kind of an indication of the condition of the landscape. And so perhaps like a habitat field paired with a condition field would help us get to, potential impacts to a site and, the implications of not just the habitat, but the current condition of the habitat for the material assemblage that we're seeing on the ground.
Okay, thank you, Jeremiah, for that. We'll again have some conversations and consider all of this and revisit.
I saw Patty shaking her head.
Gina?
Yeah, so my other concern with this is the kind of artifacts section and the fact that it is so broad of just presence absence. Because you get a lot of the information, like if I have one chopper versus I have 20 choppers, that's a big difference. And so I didn't know, like, even if you wanted to make it still an attachment, if you guys could create a form that would be standard kind of used for that kind of attachment, like my feature one is this and my artifact one is this, because yeah, in my opinion, also for research purposes, especially with like XRF and that kind of stuff, saying presence, absence of projectile points, well, what material are they made out of? That kind of stuff. Like, does this have any research potentials for certain technologies? Like, not including that information, I think is not the best idea, because you need that information to understand eligibility, understand the time period, understand what the site was used for. That's a big one. And so having that list of artifacts is huge, even if it's an attachment that you guys have created a form for and we just add to it, and then download a separate copy and upload it again, because that's important information that's on the site form. And it helps for when you're revisiting the site, like, has the site been looted? Has all of these things gone, even if they were here before, or 5 of them gone and there was originally 20? That's a big thing in my opinion that needs to kind of be reconsidered and included.
Okay, thank you for that. Carla?
Yeah, I had 2 questions. The first was, is there going to be the possibility of being able to download the GIS, so like shape files associated with these sites, resources? That was my first question.
I believe that is a capability that the system will have, but I'll have Shannon confirm that.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Great. And then my second question or comment, I guess, was I heard of several people talking about the plants and how plants important to the indigenous community is important to include. Is there the possibility that you could maybe include a drop down or something for plants that are important to the indigenous community, like presence, absence of camas, for example? Because I mean, I am one of those archaeologists that does not know a lot about plants, but I do think that that is important, especially to identify if there is the presence of plants that are important to the indigenous community. That's just a comment.
So can I clarify your question or ask a clarifying question? When you ask if there's a possibility to provide a drop-down box, are you asking that of our office? Or are you asking if the tribes could maybe assist with developing that?
Just including it within the ICRIS database. I don't know who would develop that, probably the tribes, I would guess, but it is something that's important. I don't know. But that's what I was thinking, is including it in the ICRIS database. How you get there, I don't know, but it's just a
okay. All right, thank you. Yes. Oh, look at all that. Lindsay, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, I thank you guys all. This has been really helpful to hear sort of what you guys are thinking with the site forms. One thing I did just want to remind everyone is that all this information, you know, we're not changing what we're requesting from you in your reports. So we still want all this information. It's still all important information. We're just trying to adjust how it's recorded in our system to make it make the data more useful. And so a lot of these are sections that, you know, we hadn't found useful before, just because of how they'd been used. So just keep that in mind, that, you know, we're not trying to say that vegetation shouldn't be recorded or debitage counts. We're just sort of trying to shift where it is in our database. But definitely, this is really good feedback, and it'll help us as we kind of go through and finalize things.
Gina?
Yeah, and like I totally understand that, yeah, these areas haven't always been used the best, and so they're not the easiest to locate. But if, like, in my perspective, if we start throwing this information into just description boxes, then it's harder for me. Like, if I'm new to my field office, if I come into the field office and I'm trying to look at site forms, I may record, you know, vegetation first in this description, whereas the previous archaeologist recorded it last. And so it makes it much harder for us to query, not just digitally, but also physically. Like, I can print out the form, and so then I have to like completely go through that form, highlight what I want to highlight and what I think is important, because it's not in a systematic, easy to find way. And so even if we don't have drop down boxes, if you just have description, that's like vegetation description box and that kind of stuff, that makes it also, if I print out that form, much more visually easy to interpret on a site form. Because I understand, yeah, drop boxes, they get expensive, and little, having like percentage of vegetation, that kind of stuff, it can get pretty extensive and in depth of trying to understand and create the drop boxes and create those forms. But having just a set, this is the vegetation description box, and this is the artifact description box, and this is, yeah, like our artifact table or whatever, that makes it much more visually easy to search on a perspective from somebody coming in new to an office, that kind of thing.
Okay, thank you for that. Other thoughts or questions or comments? Recommendations? Well, I'm not seeing any. We do have another listening session scheduled for tomorrow afternoon from 2 to 4. Mostly, you know, we just wanted to make sure there was more than one opportunity in case, you know, you didn't have availability for one of the times. You know, we expect to run that listening session the same, but you are all welcome to participate in that. As well as, you know, if you have any new thoughts you want to share as you sort of cogitate over this over the next 24 hours. So please feel free to attend that session as well. And we'll look forward to hearing more from federal agencies. And again, as I mentioned, if you weren't able to be at our first ICRIS informational update last week, a recording of that meeting can be found on the State Historical Society website on the SHPO page. And on the far right-hand side, you'll see a new tab for ICRIS, and that's where we'll be uploading information about the system, and we'll put some of the documents that you've requested today up on that page as well. And as we record more of the informational sessions and as we develop training moving forward, we'll also be posting it there. So that's where you'll be able to find information. So you might want to bookmark that page. I'll give it another minute to see if anyone has any more questions. And if not, I guess we can let you go, or comments, I should say. We can let you go a few minutes early. All right, well, oh, sorry, Jeremiah's.
Yeah, sorry, I just had a couple or one more question. So on the photos, getting back to that, it looks like the current process would be to upload photos one at a time, and I was wondering if there's any plans to have like a bulk upload function, and if there is expectations in terms of, you mentioned a minimum photo number. Is there a maximum?
I don't think there's a maximum per se. What we always want and desire is enough images to allow us to understand the property and allow us to make an informed determination of eligibility. So as many photos as you feel is necessary to provide that information is fine. Do we want 500 photos for one property? No. But certainly we are always happy to have more than the minimum required if they better inform our understanding of a property. So feel free. The batch upload, that's a good question. And I don't know, Shannon, if you have an answer for that. I don't believe we've gotten to that piece of the coding yet with our developers, but we certainly recognize the desire to have that, and we will do what we can to provide that, unless Shannon, you have additional insight into that.
I don't believe that we have discussed that part yet.
With our Survey 123 field app, one thing that we have told the developers very clearly and explicitly that must have a batch upload function. So, just along those same lines, and they understand that, and they're designing the system to provide for that. So I don't know why we wouldn't be able to do something similar with just the individual resource records. It seems like a very logical thing to include, and we'll certainly do our best to make sure that it is included.
Yeah, something to think about. And here at INL, we embed the artifact descriptor, the descriptions of all the photos in the metadata of the photos. And so if there was a bulk upload function, I imagine it'd be fairly easy to program that to read the descriptions from the metadata and then use that to populate the description fields. The other question I had was about access to the system. You mentioned that you'd be looking for descriptions of qualifications for Secretary of Interior qualified folks. I'm wondering about access for seasonal techs and other folks who may not meet those standards, who we might ask for help with doing sort of labor intensive things like uploading photos.
We recognize that even currently, there are folks who work for federal agencies, particularly seasonally, that might not strictly meet the Secretary of Interior's professional qualification standards, who are working on these projects and, accessing information in a way that, maybe they wouldn't be able to do individually on their own. We can't police who's using your system. We don't have that kind of control or authority. Having said that, I don't think we have a lot of concern about those kinds of folks utilizing the system, especially under the supervision of professionally qualified staff. That's my. Go ahead.
I guess I'm wondering if there's a mechanism to give seasonals access to like agency specific data. So maybe not giving them access to the statewide data, but just the data that's within the jurisdiction of their agency. So that I'm not having to give them my login information.
Right. I don't think that we are separating out data that way. I mean, that's not something we have discussed at all. I don't know, Shannon, if you have any thoughts about that. But that's not something we've discussed.
Yeah, I think that that would be fairly complicated. It would be based on land ownership, management layer, and it would involve creating a whole new level of permissions. So I don't foresee that being an option. But
A lot of
we
this,
can.
I was just going to say, a lot of this stuff comes down to how much time is it going to take for the coders to code that? And is that something that we can afford to do? Because we have a limited budget for this project that we are self-funding essentially. So it's been, you know, there's always a give and take over, you know, what we would love to have and what we can actually afford to have. And where things are particularly complicated to code, you know, we've gone back to other approaches. For instance, you know, originally we went into this saying, well, we'll just continue to do the record search, you know, fee structure, and, you know, commercial users will just continue to, you know, be charged based on, you know, the record search area that they're using. Well, that would have taken the coders, you know, probably months to develop. And so we switched to the subscription basis, you know, because it's a much simpler approach that allows us to add other bells and whistles to the system because the coders have more time. So we've had it's been a balancing act as we've worked through this whole process with them, you know, based on our limited funding that we have for the project. So we're doing as much as we can. We want to give as much value added to our users. And so things that, you know, bells and whistles that you're asking for now, we might be able to add down the road in the future. We anticipate, you know, continually upgrading, adding to, and improving the system, you know, over the years. So if there are things as we move forward, we'll, you know, we can add them to the list of, gee, wouldn't it be great to include? And as funding becomes available, maybe we can do that.
Yeah, we can appreciate the level of complexity and the time and thought that have gone into this, and I think that some of the effort to simplify the form and move toward narrative descriptions of some of the fields will make the process of recording sites a little bit easier for us. I think the part of what we're a little bit anxious about is we currently have a fairly easy to use system that allows us to export from our database to the existing ASI database, and so moving to this system is going to, without the ability to export into this system, going to require quite a bit more labor on our end in order to get the information about the resources into the database. So because we'll be effectively entering things in two different places, and so having the ability to, you know, have our techs have access to the system so that we can get information in there would be a benefit to us. But we're cognizant of you know why the Secretary of Interior guidelines are in place, and we don't necessarily want to be passing out you know, passwords for individuals who are Secretary of Interior qualified to folks who may not be, who are employed on a temporary basis. So it's kind of, I think it's just something to think about on your end, and of course we'll adopt whatever system that the SHPO is able to put out there.
Sure. Thank you, Jeremiah. Gina.
Yeah, so I did want to ask, there was a comment in the chat asking about photo resolution requirements. And so will that be part of the information that's given to us as well for file size and that kind of information on those photo uploads? I think I was wondering about that as well. And then my other question is so I'm trying to understand. So the system is for these subscriptions, like for BLM would be like a district has their subscription, and then within that subscription is the users. And so would you be willing to like leave the qualifications, like say for text, up to the management agency to kind of distinguish between the guidelines and the like Secretary of Interior guidelines? Because even technically as a master's student and working for the BLM as I do now, I don't know that I technically meet the Secretary of Interior guidelines, but obviously I'm the only person in my field office that can do this job. So, and then also my field manager usually has access to my cultural layers. But that's based off of BLM policy and how we kind of deal with sensitive data like that. Only certain people are allowed to have it, and we do that filtering on our own part. Would the districts be allowed to do that for like text and stuff as well, because we have the one subscription, or would you guys still need the qualifications for each individual person?
That's a good question, and that, you know, that is something I think we still need to have some conversations about and determine, you know, what's going to work best for all users and what works best to make sure that the resources are protected. So you know, you can guarantee that we'll be you know, scrutinizing this issue and having some conversations and trying to figure out what the best path forward is for those questions. So we'll, I guess my answer is we'll get back to you on that as soon as we have an answer. And as far as the photo size parameters, yeah, I don't see why we can't include that. We did want to specify JPEGs rather than TIFFs because we don't want those huge TIFF files. You know, ultimately at the end of the day, we have to pay for server space to store all of this data and all of the photos, and it's a lot of data. So we will define the parameters for the photo size, and that'll be probably, you know, a little information bubble that you can skate over to get that information as you're working on the photo upload section of the form.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay. So we're just about at the end of our time. There are a few more minutes if anyone pops up with any other questions or comments. And otherwise, as I said, we will be holding another similar session tomorrow from 2 to 4 p.m. Mountain Time. If any of you would like to participate in that, you are of course more than welcome. And we'll look forward to hearing your comments at that time if you join us. And also, of course, we have scheduled another 4 or 5 information systems or information sessions in the coming months as we get closer to go live. And at those, you know, more of these issues will be fleshed out. We'll be able to share them and show you demonstrations as we get them from our developers, and you'll get a better sense of how things are going to work in that more detailed sense. So not seeing any other questions, I guess maybe we'll say goodbye for today and look forward to maybe seeing some of you at tomorrow's session as well. So thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate your feedback and your thoughts, and you know, rest assured that we'll be taking all of this information and you know, working through it and making decisions based on what we've heard from you all today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.